I'm Neil Doherty with North Country Whitetails, and welcome to DSI. You know, for years you've been reading about big bucks and some of the stories behind how they're harvested, but you never really got a full picture. In DSI, we're going to break it down in great detail and really give you the behind-the-scenes talk and understanding why deer do what they do. We're going to merge the deer stories with the science behind how the deer move, the food sources in the area, get up above and study aerial photography and really teach you how to use those techniques when it comes to your hunts this fall. This is a story of Flipper. Now, before you wonder too much about the name, we had to rename this buck because of the transition that he had in personality as he finally switched into an aggressive buck from being a docile buck that we hardly ever saw. Now, his switch ultimately resulted in my ability to get close to him and get him killed, but we'll get to that in a little bit. First off, this buck was hunted on a 500-acre farm, which had been intensively managed for about 10 years for older age deer. We're really targeting 4-year-old deer or older on this farm. It had a number of good quality food sources on it, some large destination fields that were filled with clover and chicory, clear cut stretching throughout the property to help capitalize on some movement and also create lots of browse in the form of young regenerating trees and brambles and briars, as well as small food plots tucked throughout the property, and even some good ag fields that were planted, as this cornfield was, planted and left standing through the duration of the gun season and through the winter for the deer to feed on. And this environment really had all the resources necessary to keep this buck home from the time he was a young deer. First encountered what we end up nicknaming Flipper as a 3-year-old. And as a 3-year-old, he came marching into this stand location that I had. He came across and worked up in and was actually following behind a doe and traveled through. And at 3, I had a shot at him at about 12 yards with bow in hand. I came full draw just to practice with him. And I had the shot and let him go. And he had a very distinctive rack at 3. On his G2s, he had 2 little nubs that he ended up carrying for the rest of his life, so we could kind of keep track of him year to year. At 3, he was kind of a normal buck in terms of we'd see him every so often, but there were some really good bucks on the farm, and he wasn't really on the harvest list, so he kind of slipped through the cracks in terms of paying attention to his daily movements. At 4 and 5, he was still on the farm. We knew he was there. We had seen him a couple times show up in and around with some does that are feeding, but quite honestly, he never showed the typical rut behavior that you expect from a deer. When we visually saw him out there feeding in a field, whether it was late in the season, he was feeding in this cornfield over here, or even earlier in the season, he would take a look at the does and maybe make a half-hearted chase into the does, but never really got into the full-blown chase, I'm going to try to run you down and breed you, activity that you expect to see from bucks that are getting to be 4 and 5 and 6 years old. As a matter of fact, when he was 6, I thought he was long gone. I hadn't photographed the deer in quite some time, and through the course of hunting, he showed up and walked through one of the funnels that we had. And again, I saw him in the edge of darkness, going through the thick stuff, and he just kind of slipped through. And with the glasses, I could see those 2 little stickers off his G2s, and knew which one it was, and knew he was still alive. Keep in mind, there's 7 cameras on this farm that are 24/7 pounding away on these fields, photographing dozens of other bucks that are using these fields in and out, capturing 30 or 40,000 pictures during the fall hunting season. Yet this buck is able to stay off the radar, and we're not able to photograph him. And I fully believe that he didn't leave this area because the neighboring properties are hunted very heavily. If he's getting off the property, spending any kind of time off the property, more than likely he would get caught up in a deer drive and get killed. Now, there was a great deer on this farm while he was a 6-year-old, and I think that probably subdued his behavior some. He just didn't want to rise up and push his luck too much with that real old deer. Now, at age 7, Flipper, this is where his name came from, really made a dramatic change in his behavior. He went from being kind of a standoffish buck to running non-stop chasing does. The first indication that we had that he had changed his behavior was a series of photos that we had when he showed up parading across this 3-acre destination field. And And actually things he gave us a couple real good looks at his rack as he moved through, but he was feeding, he was a lot more visible. And then as the rut started to kick in, now that was in the pre-rut, as the rut started to kick in, we started to see him moving through the property, showing up at licking branch locations and chasing does. Now in the last 3 years, we'd never noticed him skipping around the property, but here he was showing up at different locations. Sometimes the hunters would see him, other times we'd photograph him across the entire property. Fast forward into archery season, we're really hitting the stride of the rut, and I'm moving down into a stand location that is located just off the edge of this large destination cornfield. And the idea is I'm going to try to catch some bucks that are working the outer perimeter of this food plot location, kind of the staging area, and catch them as they move through, scent checking for the does that have left the field early that morning. So I'm trying to catch about a 9 o'clock movement. When the rut starts to hit, I don't like to hit my stands much before first light. Again, I'm of the school that you're liable to encounter a good buck on the way to your tree stand. If it's dark, you can't do anything about it. If it's just on the edge of light, you can make a play, maybe get them killed on the ground, or see those deer and avoid bumping into them and running them off the farm. As I moved my way down this access logging road, I ran into Flipper. He was out working a licking branch here, right behind a hot doe, several other deer around him, and actually turned into one of the best archery hunts I've ever had. The doe was probably the first estrus doe. It was November 1st, November 2nd, right that first part of November. The first estrus doe in the area, and she had 8 different bucks that were trying to chase her and court her. And Flipper ended up being the dominant buck of the bunch. He ran her past me at about 12 yards on the ground. I couldn't get a shot. As soon as they were out of sight, I went as fast as I could up to my tree stand. And in the next 2 hours, I had 2 different times the buck at 30 yards where I had draw opportunities, but with the rut, things were happening too quick and just couldn't make the shot happen. He was moving too fast with all these other bucks that were chasing her around. So as the rut kicked in, I said, man, he's going to be a pretty easy buck to kill. And true to form with old deer, he disappeared. He absolutely disappeared after that period of time. We didn't photograph him. We didn't see him for another nearly 3 weeks worth of time. In the back of my mind, I was wondering, with his personality change, did he get killed? And we advanced into the rifle season. And it was the second day of rifle season. I was still hunting this buck, even though I didn't know where he was and where he had been in the last 3 weeks. I was hunting the fringe areas of where he had been over the last 3 years and keying in on these food sources where the girls were, readjusting my strategy now because he was girl-driven as he had changed his behavior in his 7th year. It was the second or third day of the rifle season. I had standing corn out in the field. There was a number of does that were out in the food plot, several other small bucks chasing those does around, and down the ridge line comes Flipper buck. I see him moving down through. He hit the edge of the field and presented me with a great shot, and I was able to finally close him out after a number of years of having him on the farm. Really excited about the deer because it was a 7-year-old deer, but also the curious part about the thing was the personality changes. If you're lucky enough to hunt deer year after year, you're going to see that their behaviors change. They might get aggressive one year, they might be kind of subdued the next year. And keying in on those attitude changes and understanding those attitude changes and hunting accordingly can make all the difference in the world when it comes down to being able to harvest that deer.